At 4:43 every morning, Jeffrey Cole unlocked the glass doors of Alder Row Labs and stepped into an office built by people who treated sleep like a character flaw. The converted warehouse stood in Seattle's South Lake Union district, between luxury apartments and a coffee shop, where a 12-ounce pour-over cost more than Jeffrey's lunch. Inside, exposed brick framed bright slogans about disruption, while engineers in expensive sneakers argued over code beneath hanging bicycles. By the time the first developer arrived, Jeffrey had emptied 40 wastebaskets, cleaned 3 conference rooms, and scrubbed dried oat milk from the concrete floor. Nobody asked his name. To most of the staff, he was the night janitor in the Navy work shirt who replaced their recycling bags and disappeared before breakfast. That morning, Jeffrey stood alone in the executive conference room, staring at a wall-mounted screen filled with frozen code. He shouldn't have understood it. He understood all of it. A red message flashed beneath the Alder Row logo. Security token failure. Build rejected. Someone had left a laptop open beside a bowl of cold ramen. On the whiteboard, a senior engineer had drawn 6 boxes connected by arrows, then circled the last one hard enough to damage the marker tip. Jeffrey studied the diagram. The token isn't failing, he whispered. The clock is drifting. He reached toward the keyboard, then stopped. 7 years earlier, that hand had signed payroll checks for 86 employees. Now it smelled like lemon cleaner. Jeffrey lowered the laptop screen and returned to wiping the table. At 5:20, his phone vibrated. The caller was Ruth Delgado, the retired nurse who lived across the hall from him in White Center. "Peggy's fine," Ruth said before he could ask. "But your heater quit again." Jeffrey closed his eyes. "Is she with you?" "Eating toast at my table and complaining that I cut it wrong." His 9-year-old daughter grabbed the phone. "She cuts it into triangles." "That sounds serious. You know I like squares." He smiled. "Put on your gray sweatshirt. I'll be home after my shift." "You always say that." The words weren't angry. That made them worse. Jeffrey leaned against the conference table. After clocking out, he still had 2 buses to catch before taking Peggy to school. At noon, he started a delivery shift. "I know," he said. "I'm working on it. Don't buy cereal. We still have some." "Since when are you my accountant?" "Since you started putting grocery receipts in the cookie jar." Ruth took the phone back. "She'll stay here until you get home." "Thank you." Jeffrey remained still after the call ended. At 41, he looked older than his age. Gray had started spreading through his dark hair, and a thin scar crossed his left eyebrow. Peggy remembered a father who counted quarters at the laundromat. She didn't remember the black cars investors once sent for him. She didn't remember magazine interviews or the name Cole Meridian Systems glowing across a downtown tower. Jeffrey preferred it that way. At 6:14, the elevator opened. Amy Bennett stepped out carrying a laptop bag, a paper cup, and the kind of exhaustion that made even expensive clothes look borrowed. She was 35, Alder Row's director of product operations, and one of the few executives who arrived before sunrise without announcing it to the whole company. She stopped beside a printer where Jeffrey was removing a strip of crumpled paper. "That thing's been broken for 3 days. The tray guide is bent." He adjusted a plastic tab and closed the panel. The printer produced a clean page. Amy raised an eyebrow. "You work miracles now." "Only before coffee." She almost smiled. Most executives spoke to Jeffrey without looking at him. Amy always looked. That was why he avoided her. 7 years had changed her hair and added faint lines around her eyes. But he had recognized her on his first night at Alder Row. She had been a 28-year-old customer support manager at Cole Meridian, standing in the lobby the morning the company closed. Amy studied him now. "Have we met before?" "No, you sure?" "It's early. What's your last name?" Jeffrey stood and reached for his cleaning cart. "Cole." The cup stopped near her mouth. Behind them, the elevator opened again. 3 engineers hurried out, talking over one another. "The deployment is dead. Customer data isn't syncing. We have 2 hours before the board demo." Jeffrey pushed his cart toward the service hallway. One engineer said, "It started when we moved to the backup region." Jeffrey stopped. Amy noticed. "What is it?" "Nothing." "You heard him." Jeffrey looked through the glass wall at the error message. "Check the server clocks," he said. "The backup region is validating the token against the wrong timestamp." The senior engineer frowned. "How would you know that?" Jeffrey tightened his hands around the cart. "Old systems do old things." Amy's face slowly lost its color. She had heard that calm voice during a system failure 7 years earlier. Check the regional time service, she told the engineers. They rushed into the conference room. Less than a minute later, the red message disappeared. 11.4 seconds behind, the senior engineer called. The build passed. Amy stared at Jeffrey. Jeffrey Cole. The service elevator opened, but he didn't step inside. For the first time since taking the cleaning job, Jeffrey knew that running was no longer an option. The office went quiet in the way offices did when everyone wanted to hear something they had no right to hear. Not here, Jeffrey said. Amy followed him into the supply room and closed the door. You disappeared, she said. No call. No explanation. 86 people came to work and found the doors locked. I remember. Do you? He looked directly at her. You wore a yellow raincoat. You held a cardboard box against your chest and kept asking whether the customer accounts were safe. Her anger faltered. You heard me. I heard everyone. And you still left. Jeffrey folded a rag into a small square. My daughter is waiting across the hall from an apartment with no heat. I worked all night, and I have another job at noon. Whatever answer you want, I can't give it to you here. At 7:06, he clocked out. When Jeffrey reached his building, Peggy was sitting at Ruth's kitchen table, eating the center from a piece of toast. A blue plastic lockbox covered in faded stars rested on a shelf behind her. Peggy's mother had given it to Ruth during her final hospital stay. Your mom said it belonged to your father, Ruth had once explained. She also said not to give it to him until he was ready to stop hiding. Jeffrey had never asked what that meant. Grief had taught him how to walk around locked doors without touching the handle. That morning, he moved Peggy's school bag into their cold apartment and found an envelope pushed beneath the door. It carried the logo of Alder Rose Legal Department. Inside was a notice claiming that Alder Rose emergency routing technology belonged to Daniel Cole, Jeffrey's older brother and former chief financial officer. The same routing engine had once been Cole Meridian's most valuable invention. Jeffrey called the number on the envelope. Amy answered. Legal sent notices to every address connected to the original patent, she said. I asked them to let me speak with you before they filed anything. Is Alder Row being sold? Her silence answered him. If Daniel wins an injunction, she said, the acquisition collapses. Hundreds of jobs go with it. Jeffrey looked at Peggy, who was checking her homework beneath 3 layers of clothing. Come to the building's community room at 10, he said. Bring your general counsel. Don't come alone. At 10, Amy arrived with Maria Chun, Alder Row's general counsel. Ruth watched Peggy upstairs while the adults sat around a scratched folding table. Jeffrey placed an old metal cash box in front of them. Inside was an unfiled employee trust agreement naming all 86 Cole Meridian workers as beneficiaries of the routing engine. Amy found her name on page 4. You gave the patent to us? She asked. I tried to. The company was failing, and the engine was the only thing worth saving. Maria examined the signatures. Why wasn't this completed? The attorney withdrew when our accounts froze. Jeffrey explained what happened next. The night before Cole Meridian shut down, someone transferred money from its operating account using his credentials. Daniel offered to bury the transaction if Jeffrey assigned him the patent. Jeffrey refused and went to federal investigators. The missing funds were traced and returned to payroll, vendors, and customers, but the investigation remained sealed while prosecutors pursued 2 investors. Daniel cooperated and avoided charges. Jeffrey sold his home and surrendered his remaining assets to settle civil claims. Then Peggy's mother, Laura, became ill. By the time the federal case ended, Laura was gone and Jeffrey's name had already become a warning people repeated in technology circles. Why didn't you tell us after the case closed? Amy asked. At first, Daniel knew where Peggy went to daycare and where Laura received treatment. Later, there was no threat, just shame. Jeffrey held Amy's gaze. I protected my family when they needed it. Then I kept hiding when they didn't. That part is mine. The honesty quieted the room. Maria pointed to the assignment Daniel had submitted. The signature may be copied, but proving that will take time. Do you have emails, drafts, or the attorney's original records? The attorney died 3 years ago. His firm closed. A man's voice came from the doorway. Then you have an intention, not a trust. Daniel Cole stood in the hall with his own attorney. He had learned about the meeting through the legal notices exchanged between counsel, not by tracking anyone's phone. This is a private meeting, Maria said. Daniel's attorney handed her a letter requesting settlement talks. We'll remain in the hall. Daniel looked at his brother. Withdraw the trust claim and recognize the assignment. I'll withdraw the injunction. Alder Row completes its sale, and you keep your name out of the press. You emptied the operating account, Jeffrey said. Daniel's polished expression slipped. I kept 2 investors from burying us while you promised employees ownership in a company that couldn't meet payroll. You moved money through accounts they controlled. I contained the collapse you created. There it was. Not innocence, but the story Daniel had told himself for 7 years. The court may still accept my assignment, Daniel said. How many more employees do you want to hurt proving you were the hero? Jeffrey looked down at the unfinished trust. For years, fear had made every bad bargain sound like protection. Then Peggy entered with Ruth behind her, carrying the blue lockbox. Mom said Dad should have this when he stopped being scared of questions, Peggy said. Jeffrey stared at Laura's handwriting across the old tape. This time, he opened the box. The box did not contain one perfect piece of evidence that solved everything. It contained pieces. There was an old Cole Meridian key card, Laura's hospital bracelets, printed emails between Jeffrey and the attorney who drafted the trust, and a flash drive taped inside an envelope. Laura had worked part-time in Cole Meridian's records office before Peggy was born. She had copied financial backups after noticing that Daniel repeatedly requested changes under Jeffrey's credentials. When Jeffrey refused to look at them during her illness, she preserved them for the day fear no longer made the decision for him. On the flash drive were security logs, account numbers, and a short phone recording. Daniel's voice could be heard telling one investor that the transfer would appear under Jeffrey's login. The recording alone was not enough. The logs alone were not enough. Together with the bank records from the old federal case and the emails establishing the trust state, they gave Maria a path worth taking. Daniel's attorney advised him not to speak. Amy copied the files to an encrypted legal archive while Maria contacted outside counsel and arranged for a forensic examiner to preserve the original drive. Daniel watched Jeffrey. You think this repairs what you did? No, Jeffrey said. It proves what you did. Repairing the rest will take longer. Daniel left without signing a settlement. Jeffrey remained at the table. Peggy rested one hand on his shoulder. Are you still scared? She asked. Yes. Are you going to hide again? He looked at Amy, Maria, Ruth, and the unfinished trust that had survived 7 years in a cash box. No, for once. He answered before fear could answer for him. The legal process moved slowly. Alder Row's board postponed the acquisition rather than sell the company with disputed technology. Forensic specialists authenticated the files. Investigators matched Laura's backups to records preserved in the old federal case. Daniel was later charged with financial crimes and obstruction, though his attorneys challenged the evidence, and the proceedings continued for months. Jeffrey testified twice. The first time, he lost his place and had to begin again. The second time, he looked at the former employees seated behind the attorneys. I didn't steal from you, he said. But when I was finally free to speak, I let shame keep me silent. You deserved the truth sooner. Some forgave him quickly. Others did not. He accepted both responses. After a long court review, the employee trust was recognized as the rightful owner of the routing engine. The beneficiaries did not become rich. Alder Row negotiated a license that provided modest payments and ownership units to the former Cole Meridian employees. More important to many of them, the public record finally stated that Jeffrey Cole had not stolen their money. Alder Row's board offered him the chief executive position. He refused. I don't want my old life back, he told Amy. What do you want? A job where I can take Peggy to school. He became a systems advisor, working 4 days a week with no overnight shifts. After the city cited his landlord for repeated heating violations, Jeffrey used his first month's salary to move Peggy into a small apartment where the windows closed properly and the heater worked without negotiation. Amy visited, but neither of them pretended 7 lost years could be repaired by one apology. They remembered some events differently. Jeffrey still withdrew when conversations came too close. Amy still asked questions before he was ready. Still, she stayed. One rainy morning, Peggy sat between them at the kitchen table, eating the cereal she used to call too expensive. Are you Dad's boss now? She asked. Amy looked at Jeffrey. Definitely not. Jeffrey poured coffee. She tries. Peggy considered that. Are you his friend? Amy waited. Jeffrey did too. Finally, he said, she's getting there. Amy smiled, not because the answer was perfect, but because it was honest. For years, Jeffrey had believed protecting the people he loved meant carrying every consequence alone. He had mistaken silence for sacrifice and disappearance for safety. Laura had preserved the truth because she believed there would come a day when he was ready to share its weight. Jeffrey finally understood what his daughter had known all along. Being strong did not mean making yourself invisible. Sometimes it meant letting someone stand beside you when the truth became too heavy to hold alone.